November 7th, 1941 saw the most unusual military parade in the nation's history. Today we'll tell you about it. You're hearing the Slavyanka Farewell, by far the most popular march in Russian. It was composed in 1912 by Vassily Agapkin, a regimental trumpet major. It was the time when the peoples of the Balkans began their war of liberation against the Turkish yoke. He dedicated the march to the women who were seeing their sons, husbands and fiancés off to war. As time went on, Vasily Agapkin became a musician, conductor and composer. He served in the army for 62 years. The most memorable day of his long and eventful life was November 7th, 1941, and the military parade he personally took part in. In the fall of 1941, the German troops approached Moscow. The Russian capital was in a state of siege. This notwithstanding, the government decreed that the traditional military parade be held on Red Square to celebrate another anniversary of the Bolshevik Revolution and demonstrate to the world the high morale of the Red Army. On a very short notice, on November the 2nd, the bandmaster Vasily Agapkin was given an order to put together a consolidated military band that would participate in the parade. It was a rather challenging project, considering that most musicians of the time were at the front line. The only option left was to assemble the band using the field musicians from the military units stationed in Moscow. Agapkin was running out of time just one full day and 2 nights before the parade. And yet, with just 2 rehearsals, he managed to fine-tune the newly formed band and make the players perform orderly. The early morning of November 7th, 1941 was somber, windy and cold. Before dawn, military convoys had converged just outside Red Square. The parade was to begin at 8 o'clock sharp. It was still dark in November, and the event would not be an easy target for a possible German air raid. Regimental bands arrived at the Historical Museum right on time. They assumed a formation of a large consolidated band and marched on to Red Square. An embarrassing incident took place when, walking on the frozen granite paving blocks, the drummer tripped and fell, his huge drum hitting the ground and booming like a bell. The soldiers lined up nearby rolled with laughter, and the bandmaster's heart sank. He looked at the government stands. They were still empty. Agapkin calmed down. The drummer was quickly helped up, and the musicians realigned themselves. The band took their position on Red Square, forming a perfect triangle. The musicians were rubbing their hands, cleaning the snow off their hats and instruments. Someone shouted, "The keys are freezing. How are we going to play?" Agapkin was alarmed. There was no alcohol handy to moisten the keys. Nobody had anticipated the sudden drop in temperature and a blizzard within just a couple of hours. Agapkin regained composure and gave an order. "Instruments under the coats." Small brass were easy to cover with uniform coats, but what about the basses? They had to be covered with the coat flaps, and the keys had to be warmed up with hands. The Kremlin clock chimed 8. Marshal Budyonny galloped on horseback from the Spassky Gate. Bandmaster Agapkin swung his arms, and the band began to play. Having accepted the parade commanding officer's report, Marshal Budyonny headed for the government stands at the mausoleum. Word to be passed, the fanfares solemnly announced. The Commander-in-Chief, Joseph Stalin, addressed the people. He briefly touched on the temporary setbacks at the front line and expressed complete confidence in victory.
The world is looking at us as the force capable of destroying the predatory hordes of the German invaders. The enslaved peoples of Europe, languishing under the yoke of the German aggressors, are looking at us as their liberators. The great mission has been thrust upon us, the mission of liberation. Be worthy of it. The war you are waging is the war of liberation, a just war.
Stalin's speech was followed by the parade. The band thundered out a march. Agapkin, standing on a special podium, cheered up. The band was playing smoothly and confidently. Like clockwork, they were moving on from one tune to another. Foot troops were followed by cavalry, and then the tanks rolled onto Red Square. During that parade, Agapkin's masterpiece was played as well. The papers later wrote, "That was the most astounding parade in history. Right from Red Square, accompanied by the poignant tune of Slavyanka Farewell, the soldiers went straight to the front line." In 1941, Bandmaster Agapkin was almost 60. He was not drafted. His weapon was patriotic music that inspired and united people. The tune of Slavianka Farewell excited not only the hearts of men at the front line, but of the poets as well. They wrote the lyrics to the tune. When the war was finally over, Vassily Agapkin was there to greet the victors. His band took part in the 24th of June 1945 parade on Red Square in Moscow. And again, the Slavianka Farewell March was played, the beloved tune that the heroes carried in their hearts to Berlin and back home again.